Okay, welcome to part two of the final lecture. All right, technology. Technology, most generally, those are tools, refers to tools, the whole collection of tools that we use to do whatever it is we need to do. Sociologists have always been interested in those, but most importantly, they study how they're integrated with our social behavior and social relationships, and how that particular arrangement results in different types of society. Technology is something which we produce it and use it collectively, although often it's privately appropriated. A lot of the research that goes into that is the basis of many technological devices, pharmaceuticals, and power systems, and all these things may have been funded by the public sector. It may come out of academic college laboratories, government laboratories, but often someone manages to privatize that. So that's not done illegally by any means. I'm just saying that it's a collective product that it's privately appropriated. Our use of it is definitely collective. We use technologies in ways that we're influenced by other people we interact with. We may find a new use for something, for instance, a new use for your smartphone that you didn't know you could do. You could get a meditation app, or you can use it to count your steps, find out how much you're walking each day. There are all manner of things that someone else might have tell you about that you didn't know. Um, that will allow you to use some technical device or system differently than you had in the past. As I already mentioned, the development of the internet and information technology has transformed the way we live. You may recall Castell saying that these days we are using technology to produce more advanced technology, even though we still produce commodities and things. But the big push is to produce more advanced technology. Where you can see that come into play in a big way is artificial intelligence, AI, those systems that allow, in many cases, the ability to take specific job tasks away from humans, or whether they want to get rid of it or not, and have it performed by some system, a computer, and perhaps in conjunction with cameras and armatures of some moving parts that allow them to do something physical in the world, as opposed to just something abstract and information based. So these applications of computer technology in the workplace are going to have a major transformative effect on our lives, because what we will see as time goes forward, and perhaps it's going to take a great leap forward here, is that more and more tasks that thinkers used to believe could only be done by humans can be done by a machine that has an AI system built into it, or that runs upon an AI platform. It used to be believed that computers could never beat a human chess grandmaster, but that has happened more than once. And part of the reason that people believed this could not be done, and it was done, is because they misconceived what was actually happening. They were thinking in terms of the AI system simply reproducing what it was that humans did. AI systems do things in a completely different way than humans can, which really ultimately it allows, it makes them more powerful. It may take longer for them to develop and go through the training of their neural networks, the machine learning process, to get to the point where they can replace a particular task that humans perform, but it's definitely feasible. it's possible, some of the only things that may be left for humans to do that AI systems and robots can't will involve direct care of another human being, and even that is debatable. Often the debate about job loss due to automation has, some have said, Daniel Susskind is one, it's been misplaced because they confuse job replacement with task replacement. Each person's job consists of a variety of tasks. Some of those could be done by a machine, but perhaps not all of them. So what we will see is individual tasks gradually become something that a machine system, automated system, AI machine/machine can accomplish. So let's get to more of that in a moment. So we're talking about what comes next in terms of social change for humans, what it will be like to be a social being in 20 years, 50 years. A group of people in Silicon Valley have been contemplating that for some time, and they have come up with some radical answers. Ray Kurzweil advanced the notion of the singularity, sort of based on Moore's law, that computer power doubles at a particular rate, and there's no theoretical end to what computers will be able to do. He believes that eventually there will come a point when computers are powerful enough to solve all of our problems. And they will be more powerful than we are, in fact. They'll be more powerful than the intelligence of every human combined. He calls this the singularity, and this is going to be a new era for us. We're not going to have to work. We'll never get sick. We won't die. Nobody will be poor. That's a utopian dream, but many people have bought into it. Kurzweil takes 200 and some nutritional, so let's say, supplements per day to ward off illness, to enhance his cognitive function and so forth. These drugs that enhance cognitive function have a bit of a cult following. They're known as nootropics. If you go on Reddit and put that into the search field, you will find a lot of chatter about what particular substance does what. Noos is Greek for mind, and tropism involves the Greek for change. So you're changing your mind's function, enhancing your intelligence and creativity and all manner of other cognitive processes, allegedly. So there's a link here you can look at if you choose. There's several links here, actually. Many of the nootropics are, run-of-the-mill nutritional supplements that we probably get in food anyway. So a lot of them are overhyped. Well, many of them. You've seen commercials on television, I'm sure, for substances available at your pharmacy that will supposedly improve your brain function. Well, maybe not. There isn't a lot of hard evidence to support the value of most of these drugs. A few of them are drugs that were used in clinical trials for Alzheimer's disease, for dementia, and were abandoned because it was found they did not work, and then nobody was interested in them. It just became an unregulated chemical that you could buy online. Noopept is one, which was very popular for a while, OEPT. I don't know if it's even available anymore. The FDA will come down on you hard if you make a claim you cannot support, even if the substance is not regulated as a drug, which most of them are not. They're regulated as supplements. There are people in this movement who do not believe death is necessary. Death is a disease. It is a disease that can be cured through drugs, through organ replacement. In some cases, people who advocate this are aware that it's going to take a while to develop this, so they pay to have their body, or in many cases, because this is the cheapest route, simply their head preserved cryogenically in cold storage, awaiting the day when the solution to death has been found. Well, I don't know what kind of what life would be like if nobody ever left it. It seems like it might get crowded, jobs might be scarce, but then maybe we won't need them if the singularity comes. I don't know. Here's some, this movement is known as transhumanism. There are quite a few powerful, wealthy people who are buying into this. To Be a Machine is a book that there are interviews and analyses of what these folks are up to. It's easy reading if you're interested in this. Look for it. I have not read Life 3.0, read To Be a Machine, but this is more of a true believers treatment of how we are going to transcend our human limitations. We are going to be post-human. We may integrate machine technology into our bodies. Some programmers in Silicon Valley think that our consciousness is nothing more than code. Consciousness is just something which it needs to be. You need to find a mathematical solution for it, and then you can write the code to implant it in a machine. If you've seen Westworld, you know where they're coming from there. If you haven't seen Westworld on HBO, I'm not saying I recommend it. It's an interesting show. You also find a lot of, references to these kinds of issues on Black Mirror, which is a Netflix series made in the UK. Excellent series. I definitely would recommend watching that if you have Netflix. Black Mirror. It's sort of a dystopian treatment on technology. Dystopia is the opposite of a utopia. Utopia is everything is great, perfect, and so forth. Dystopia is the complete exact opposite. Okay, a couple other books that I've come across recently that are relevant to technology. Social media, of course, the technology is, enables that, our smartphones and computers. Facebook is a massively capitalized company, Twitter as well. Richard Seymour's book, The Twittering Machine, analyzes the impact that spending so much time on Twitter may be having on us. Jared Lanier, one of the pioneers of virtual reality, has written a book called Why You Should Delete Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. He doesn't mean you should delete them permanently, just do it and see how you feel. He believes that people are being trained to behave in certain ways as they use social media, as I believe that as well. The techniques that are used, he illustrates, are similar to how dogs are trained. And he said we should not be dogs, we should be cats. Cats are craftier, they're harder to train, they can be. But it's not quite as simple as getting a lot of likes. The like button some people call cybercrack. Anyway, technology, pardon me, AI systems, all of the information we're putting out that we're providing for free about ourselves and the way we think and what we desire and what we don't, that we are doing when we're on Twitter, on Facebook. Those companies are in business to basically analyze and sell our data to advertisers, to people that want to craft their message to get us to buy a product. As I said, we are a consumer society. Our economy is heavily consumer driven, as we're seeing now that so many consumer oriented businesses have closed. People have been unable to go out and shop as they had in the past, or go to restaurants and have craft cocktails and whatever it is they might ordinarily do. That has ended. So Seymour and Shoshana Zuboff, who is a professor of law at Harvard, both address this issue of the fact that we are, in a sense, doing unpaid labor for Twitter, for Facebook, for Google. And that's their business model, really, is to harvest our data, analyze it algorithmically, and auction the findings to the highest bidder. Zuboff's book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, is a pretty sophisticated theoretical treatment of this whole era. It is a fat book. I have not finished it. Analysts have been writing a lot of very long books lately, and it's starting to, wear me out physically and mentally. But it's an excellent book. She does it. It's kind of repetitive because she's really trying to uh, dot every I, cross every T, and in this theoretical edifice. But basically, she feels that there's a transformation in social power through the development of this technology, which we willingly participate in. Okay, as I said, as we transition to a full-on information economy, the nature of work's going to change. Those jobs and tasks that cannot at present be automated are where you're going to see the highest growth. This is an older claim here, or an older summary. I mentioned truck driving. Well, we may have driverless trucks soon. I'm not eager to see it, but janitorial work. Well, I have a robot vacuum, not a Roomba, but something similar. It's not all that good. It cannot replace all the tasks, but nevertheless, I have it. Nursing, probably yes, need nurses, but some things could be, the number of nurses in a healthcare facility could probably go down as systems come online to do some of the regular monitoring of patients. Home healthcare aides, not so much, they have to travel. But these jobs, with the exception of nursing, pay relatively low wages. Truck driving is probably the second highest paid there. And then we have the gig economy, contract workers or portfolio workers. In the UK, they're called 0 hours workers because you're not guaranteed of working at all in a particular week. That's what the guarantee is, 0. We'll let you know if we need you. Those jobs obviously have no benefits. By that I mean health benefits. Typically, I think Uber may be providing some now. It's changing as perhaps there's more pressure on these companies that are, in many cases, they're not profitable at present, but they're heavily capitalized. A lot of people are investing in their business and loaning them, providing loans. The revenue per share for the Uber corporation has been going down steadily in the past few months. Obviously, it's going down right now because not that many people are out on the roads. Amazon, one of the stars of the digital economy, they're going to report a loss this quarter, even though they're hiring 100,000 people and their revenues have been higher than ever because so many people are shopping online. But they've had to ramp up to that. What happens when they ramp down, I'm not sure. Obviously, people will lose these jobs that were recently created. Unless retail just takes a hit, is taking a hit from which it will not recover. That's a definite possibility. The era of the department store, for instance, may be over. Malls, many smaller stores in malls probably are not going to survive what's happening right now. So anyway, I mentioned AI systems, and part of that involves robots. We've all seen robots in action, probably on television and films, if not in our homes. If we're not asking Alexa to do things, Alexa is more of not a very smart AI system rather than a robot. A lot of people are optimistic about this advanced technology. These are a couple. I have not read Siegel's book, Fewer, Richer, Greener, Prospects for Humanity in an Age of Abundance. I kind of smell the singularity there, but the publisher is highly reputable. So I'm not sure how we get from point A to that point B. What is fairly, and even these folks who Okay, this is a different book. I can't, Brynjolfsson and McAfee, The Second Machine Age, they think we're at an inflection point where it's truly about to take off. The impact of digital technology is going to be mostly good, but some people without skills are going to be left behind. I assume the left behind will not be in this fewer, richer, greener category. I suspect they might be greener because they cannot consume as many resources, but nevertheless. Martin Ford's book, Rise of the Robots, is very interesting. He believes that there will be a social transformation that's engendered by this jobless future that's ahead, or at least a future with far fewer jobs, not few things, but physically repetitive, but uh, direct human care, elder care, for instance. The robots have replaced humans on many in manufacturing sector, many tasks and complete jobs, particularly if the task is physically repetitive. Professionals like lawyers are at risk too because AI systems are becoming more sophisticated. There have been a few tests of competitions of sorts between entry-level attorneys and AI systems to see how many loopholes they could find in a given contract in a given length of time. And the AI systems outperform the human attorneys by a huge margin. So Ford thinks that there will be a social transformation because you're going to have more and more people with no jobs and no prospect of any. They will, to support them, if they're supported at all, it will come from taxes on the people that are kind of the winners of this system. Eventually, they're going to rebel against paying these taxes, and the people without jobs are probably never going to be happy with that situation. So something will have to give. It's not a sustainable system. So one possibility he mentions, many have mentioned, is something along the line of a guaranteed income. But then again, who provides that the resources for that? There's something called modern monetary theory that says the government can simply print its own money because they are the ones who tax the people, so they're the source of money. That's not exactly true. Another couple of books here recently published. This is a veritable industry writing about the jobless future. And here's a few of our robot buddies. This is from Black Mirror. If you, I don't remember the name of the episode, but Urbanization. As it sounds, that is simply the growth of larger and larger communities, conurbations, they're often called, with more and more people in them. This is an image of the United States at night. Here we are, here, Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio. This is from 2012, so Austin's bigger now, I imagine. Chicago, the Bay Area, Los Angeles, Miami, New York, Boston up here. Anyway, so urbanization, a city definition. Now, we've already mentioned that the first cities were formed about 4 to 5,000, well, 5,000 years ago, roughly 5,500. Egypt, Iraq, Indus Valley. The term urban has a specific meaning. It doesn't matter for our purposes. Just that one statistic, 2% of the world's population lived in cities in 1850. Most people lived in small towns or on farms, but agriculture was not as efficient. Tractors did not exist. You still needed a mule or a horse to do your plowing. Not so anymore. All our food is produced by an increasingly smaller number of people, on a percentage basis. It's believed that by 2050, 70%, it's almost 3/4 of the world's population will live in urban areas. Here are some other areas of the world at night if you want to take a look and see where development is. The growth of cities has had an adverse effect on the natural environment. the built environment as the city. The natural environment is what it is built in. Why might that be? Well, people tend to drive cars or ride in other forms of transit that typically produce or use fossil fuels and produce some sort of pollution. Not in every case. To build parking lots and shopping malls and apartment buildings and houses, you have to pave over natural habitats. The animals, wildlife that was there are displaced. All of the asphalt that is on top of the buildings and on dark surfaces on parking lots, that absorbs heat and it retains heat after the sun has gone down. Cities are notably hotter than the surrounding countryside. And because you have so many people, you're producing a lot more waste because, again, we are a consumer society dedicated to consumption, using resources and creating waste. So it's not hard to see the waste. Just look outside on trash day. Go to a landfill. It's getting harder and harder to find landfill space where you simply bury your trash. Recycling has become more difficult. Typically, a lot of the plastic and cardboard was shipped overseas to China after the financial collapse of 2008, when people stopped borrowing, could not borrow money on the equity in their houses and engage in continual remodeling and home flipping to the extent you had before. You had fewer cardboard boxes to recycle. That had been our primary export to China. Cardboard boxes, which they would recycle to make more cardboard boxes to ship us more goods. That slowed down quite a bit. It's going to slow down again. One reason, though, that the Chinese stopped taking our goods in the case of plastic was because it was usually too contaminated. It was not at all clean. It was not pure plastic by any means. So I'm not sure what happens to the plastic in our area. It may actually just go to the trash, even if you recycle. You also have, in Harris County, there are a lot of Superfund sites where there are toxic chemicals in the soil. Some industrial process took place, and it's an issue. It needs a cleanup. That's Superfund sites are those which were designated for cleanup, overseen by the federal government, the Environmental Protection Agency, overseen by them, but paid for by the companies responsible. Well, many of the companies responsible were out of business, had gone bankrupt long ago. So there was a pool of money drawn from manufacturers of similar products, but that has more or less ended. So if you're going to buy a house in Houston, you might remember this map here. So you may not want to be too close to one of those. Globalization also has increased environmental degradation because we've used the environment for like a supply depot, resources, natural resources we need for life and to create the things we're going to convince each other we need to buy and produce and sell and distribute. We produce waste as part of this process and then use the natural environment to deal with that waste. The environment is our living space, our habitat. So it's important that we deal with environmental problems that are threats to the quality of our habitat. The environmental problems that are created in urban areas, rural areas, are not really spread evenly throughout the city. If you've ever been to Pasadena or Texas City, you may notice a particular odor in the air. You see a lot of chemical plants. You won't smell that or see that in River Oaks or the Woodlands or Memorial Park area. That's typically you find these activities in poorer neighborhoods, poorer parts of town, often neighborhoods dominated by people of color. The issue of environmental justice and environmental racism is something which environmental sociologists, there is such a thing now, have been concerned with. If you're interested in that, I suggest you search for the term environmental justice or environmental racism. So, okay, there had been, I'm not sure who exactly is getting most of it. Waste, electronic waste, typically was shipped overseas. Again, it used to be China or other Asian countries. I'm not sure where it goes now. Additionally, you find as a result of the development of global trade that and the prohibition against things called non-tariff barriers to trade, which could be in many cases some environmental regulations. Countries have often been engaged in a race to the bottom to have the loosest environmental standards possible so that production in their nation will be cheaper than in another nation. And thereby they can attract investment in production in those nations. A race to the bottom. Why are sociologists interested in the environment? Here's a few reasons. What is it they're interested in? Individual attitudes that affect the environment, the history of the environmental movement, the risks associated with technology. This in the era when nuclear power was popular, that was a big concern, the technological risk. Politics and economic interests involved in environmental problems, the political economy of environmental problems is called. Also the social construction of environmental problems, how the issues are framed. That's done by the media, by scientists, and environmental policy formation. Now, I don't know how much exposure you had to social construction thus far in the course, so it may be peculiar to say environmental problems are socially constructed. I mean, poison air, that's not constructed, that's just produced in some cases. Well, as an example, when I first started work for Harris County Pollution Control and noticed that it didn't smell very good over there around the plants, someone told me that people that lived around there called that the smell of money. Well, that's an example of social construction of a problem. To many people, that wasn't an environmental problem. That was the sign of progress and prosperity. The same was true during the early Industrial Revolution in London. People thought the soot and the sky filled with coal smoke and dust everywhere, people's blackened with coal dust. That was a sign of prosperity. That was a good thing. So things become environmental problems when they are recognized and defined as such, which does not mean there's no impact if it's not defined as being a problem. The impact is there nonetheless, particularly on other species that have nothing to do with the production process as such. Well, here's something you can read to fill out that claim. All right. Environmental movement. It was kind of present in national form in the early part of the century with a conservation focus, but in '62, Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, was published. It was about the impact of a pesticide, DDT, on birds, and people who read it realized that the way we live our lives was having a deleterious impact on the natural world. DDT was something which it was released in the environment to kill mosquitoes, and it was very popular because it was effective. Many exterminators still miss it, but it would end up in the environment and in the soil, and it would run off into the water, and fish would eat it. It would be taken up in plants. It would not be broken down. It would work its way up the food chain to birds, and it had an effect on the shell of a bird egg. It made it extremely thin, so thin that if the parent bird was incubating the egg, most likely it would break the egg. So you started to see bird numbers drop. They are still dropping. A recent study found 1 billion fewer birds in North America than 30 years ago, but we'll get to that later. So, hence a silent spring. Songbirds were disappearing. Okay. And environmental concerns grew through the 60s, along with a lot of other social concerns. They peaked in 1970 with the first Earth Day. We just saw the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, April 21st. The environmental movement, people advocating for environmental improvements, different environmental regulation, rollback of industrial society, and so forth. It's global, takes many forms. Some forms are basically lobby groups that are membership organizations, which means they solicit members who give them money, and then they use the money to lobby for environment-friendly legislation and to solicit more members. Sierra Club is an example, Natural Resources Defense Council. There are some more radical groups like Earth First, Earth Liberation Front, that engage in civil disobedience and beyond. Earth Liberation Front has been labeled a terrorist organization by the FBI. Air pollution. Again, if you've been in Houston a while, you know about air pollution. Smog is the term that used to be used, photochemical smog. It's a stew of chemicals produced particularly earlier in the 60s and 70s, produced by automobiles and industry, reacts in the presence of sunlight to produce thick clouds, dense clouds, smelly clouds, unpleasantly dark skies. You've seen images of this in other nations currently. It's very unhealthful. It's amazingly unhealthful. So, particularly something called fine particulate matter, the shorthand is PM 2.5, 2.5 microns is the 2.5. Any particle smaller than 2.5 microns goes deep into your lungs, and it's going to stay there. It's going to be incorporated into the rest into your system. It's been shown to have very serious impacts on our health. It's been associated with higher rates of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, with asthma, of course, and basically in lifelong ill health. You're going to be predisposed to serious complications from a lot of diseases if you've grown up and lived in an area that has a lot of outdoor air pollution. Excuse me. Um, Even though, we had a lockdown of sorts, the stay-at-home order, a lot less traffic. Traffic went down considerably. But for some reason, this particulate matter went up in Houston. No one's quite sure why. It's kind of interesting. Now the petrochemical sector did, they kept operating. They're considered an essential sector. And they, are producing some of this. I'm not sure the particular proportion of all the particulate matter they're responsible for. Generally, I think it's believed that automobiles are the primary source of it. Anyway, it didn't go down. So, again, regarding air pollution, in 2019, a study done in Europe estimated that air pollution caused 600,000 extra deaths per year in Europe, and that globally 8.8 million people die prematurely as a result of the effect of outdoor air pollution on their health. And that's higher than from lung cancer and emphysema from smoking. So, but often it's kind of backburnered. Regulation is somewhat lax in the Houston area because, again, that's the smell of money. We need to keep the jobs. We need to keep the chemicals flowing. So what's an example of a disease which is made worse by air pollution? Well, COVID-19 was recently published. Some researchers at Harvard University studying people in Italy found the death rates were higher in cities that had higher levels of this PM 2.5. And summarize it by saying the study results underscore the importance of continuing to enforce existing air pollution regulations to protect human health, both during and after the COVID-19 crisis. So what's going on in Texas? Well, Texas A&M study of air, this I referred to this earlier, compared air pollution levels before the stay-at-home order was issued in Harris County and after, found one measure of air quality had shown improvement, but the particulate matter increased. Still, state regulators they've decided to use some discretion in whether or not they enforce violations of the discharge permits for companies that produce that put pollutants into the air. The state allows companies the right to emit a certain amount of toxic chemicals per year. If they go over that amount, then they have to pay a fine typically. But they're getting a pass apparently from the state in this period. They're saying that it's possible that the violation could be due to the coronavirus, labor job, people not on the job, for instance. That is debatable. They gave they gave everyone a pass right after Harvey for several months, did not have to report violations. So they tend to like to do that. They like Texas to be considered business friendly, and fining corporations that produce products related to oil particularly is not considered business friendly. The state's environmental regulators generally do a less than optimal job protecting the environment. In their mission statement, they even claim their goal is to protect the environment in a way that's consistent with economic growth. So the two really don't always mesh. Some more information about the environmental movement I've already mentioned. Now we're up to the Anthropocene. The title of the film about which questions were drawn for the final exam, from which questions were drawn for the final exam. For those of you who need to take that and haven't done some other extra credit assignment. Okay, geologists divide Earth history up into periods, and they base these periods upon differences between what they find in rocks. Now, if you've been anywhere that has topography and been driving down the highway where it's cut through a hillside or something, you may have noticed rock layers. These layers are called strata. It's the same root for our term social stratification that we used earlier. They look for indicators like suddenly you have a lot of this particular kind of fossil and then it's all gone, so you know something has changed, and that's a boundary between one epoch or era or age and another. For instance, you see a certain kind of a crustacean similar to the chambered nautilus right up to the end of the age of the dinosaurs. So whether you find dinosaur bones or not, you can date it to by looking for evidence of this creature, the ammonite. There's also another thing in the layer. Some of you may know about the enriched iridium layer at the Cretaceous tertiary boundary. But nevertheless, so the Anthropocene is a new epoch that's been proposed, and I believe it's been adopted, although they're still debating the exact boundary. And it's intended to signify an era in which humans are the most important geological process operating. We're used to thinking of earthquakes, the big plates moving around and causing earthquakes and volcanoes and erosion and all these things, ice ages. But humans are leaving a significant trace on the earth that will be here long after we're gone, assuming humans don't live for tens of millions of years on this planet. If we destroy ourselves in the next 100 years, which is not out of the realm of possibility, and some extraterrestrial explorers come here in 20 million years, and they have some geologists who do some sampling, they're going to know that a species that considered itself intelligent for a while was here and had an impact. There will be plastics in the soil that do not degrade. There will be radioisotopes from above ground nuclear explosions. There will be the remnants of cities, of the built structures. There will be mines within hard rock strata. There will be a number of things. Again, I don't think they've officially decided on what the marker will be. But no matter how you slice it, it's happened within the last 500 years. Uh, Something in that period. In the film, they discuss the Industrial Revolution. The older possible marker, which I kind of like, is this one: the exchange of plants from the old to the new world by both ways. When the Europeans conquered the people living in the Western Hemisphere, they began to plant foods from Europe, and they took things from the Americas back to Europe to grow. And pollen grains are very tough, and they end up in the soil and are embedded in rock layers. And palynologists, people who study pollen grains, and they become very good at determining species and a number of other things about pollen grains. And such a person would be able to tell there was a point at which suddenly certain types of pollen from one area were in another, and those types of pollen from that area were also in this other. They would see there had been some interchange. That interchange is often called, for other reasons, the Columbian interchange, after Christopher Columbus. They, of course, interchange diseases as well as plants and people and gold, but it's neither here nor there. So, major environmental problems: global warming, climate change. That's probably the biggest one. It's a threat to our existence. You may not believe that. Many people don't believe it. That's okay. If it is, it's going to happen without your belief is unnecessary. Uh, there are sacrifices. There are possible sacrifices that people might have to make if they accept that this is a threat to human civilization. Uh, whether or not they will make them is an open question. There are some. Naomi Klein, who's a activist journalist, written quite a few progressive books, thinks that in order for us to survive, or to make the adjustments necessary to reduce the threat of climate change, which primarily involves consuming less, using fewer fossil fuels, or none at all, leave it all in the ground beginning as soon as possible, that for it all to work, there are going to have to be other changes, and we could end up with a fairer, more just society as a result if we do it properly. So there could be a blessing in disguise. It could be a transformation to a new way of life altogether that is not quite as negative. Others are not as optimistic as that, even if you consider that optimistic. But nobody disagrees that the climate's changing, that the Earth's getting warmer. There is some disagreement about the cause. Most scientists do agree, despite what you may have heard, that humans are causing it. They're causing it through the production of greenhouse gases. These are gases that are, for carbon dioxide, methane. There are a variety of them. Methane is natural gas. It's flared off and leaks out of all of the fracking fields in West Texas and Canada that perhaps are going to shut down now. I don't know that will, for a while. I don't know that that's going to eliminate the leakage. But anyway, so what we have here, carbon dioxide. It's been known since the 19th century that carbon dioxide in the air reflects infrared radiation, reflects heat. It does not pass through a carbon dioxide layer. completely or significantly. So what it's called the greenhouse effect, because in a greenhouse, you do have a lot of carbon dioxide. Plants like it, they take it up, they grow faster, and you have a lot of sunlight coming in through the glass on the roof. And it's very warm in there because the heat of the sunlight warms everything, the ground, and a lot of it's reflected. The floors and things in there radiate heat, but it's reflected back in. It doesn't get out. It doesn't escape the building. So the greenhouse effect is a matter of things getting warmer as a result of there being more carbon dioxide. So we've been producing a lot of carbon dioxide since the Industrial Revolution. You produce it when you burn coal, when you burn oil. Additionally, methane, natural gas, it is a greenhouse gas. It is far more potent and effective at blocking infrared radiation than carbon dioxide is, in fact. A lot of the methane that exists on the planet is frozen. It's in the Arctic tundra, or it's in something called clathrates, which are frozen methane crystals, which are undersea, bottom of the ocean. It's quite cold, or in the soil just below the water level. Anyway, so the water is warming as well as the air is warming. It's definitely getting warmer each year. 2019 did not set any kind of a record, but the 10 warmest years on record have all been since 2009, including 2016, the warmest on record, 2018, 2017, 2015, 2014, 2013. They skipped 2012 and 2011, otherwise you'd have quite a run. So higher ocean temperatures, in addition to making it more likely that more of these methane clathrates will evaporate into the air and contribute to global warming and kind of a feedback effect, they're expected to produce stronger and more frequent hurricanes and storms of all types. We've had what, 400, 500-year floods in 3 years now? Or is it 3 and 4 years? I cannot recall. It's written down here somewhere. It really doesn't matter. It's too many to be considering it a 500-year flood. You shouldn't have 3 and 3 years or 3 and 4 years. Anyway, something's happening. Here's a chart. I know you love charts. This is misspelled somewhat, this Lois, but maybe not. Here's estimates of, this is the deviation from the long-term average, which is the average between 1951 and 1980. So this is 0.2 degrees centigrade below average. Now a degree centigrade is about 1.8 degree Fahrenheit, something like that. You see it's steadily going up, the deviation again. So here's this period where they're basing the average on that, and you see it's steadily marching up. There's 2016. More drought as well. Not only more rain, more storms, drought as well. We're having weather extremes are more common. Okay, here's the number. There have been 5 500-year floods in the past 5 years. So that's worse than in the southeast Texas area. Houston has had 4 500-year floods in the past 5 years. There have been more frequent wildfires. Remember them from California, from Australia. Bushfires in 2019, 2020 may have killed 1 billion animals. These are animals that exist nowhere else on Earth. Again, the majority of the scientific consensus is that climate change is anthropogenic. Anthropos, that's us, anthropology. people. Genic, that's from the root for genesis, the cause. Anthropogenic, burning fossil fuels results in more carbon dioxide. Also, there's the permafrost in the Arctic, in which there's frozen methane, natural gas. It will melt as things get warmer, and again, there's feedback at play here. More methane in the air means more global warming. One aspect of that is sea level rise. The Miami area, particularly Miami beaches, had to spend a lot of money along their coastal areas, their waterfront, to deal with the persistent flooding. Not every high tide, it's very frequent now. It's fairly frequent on the Gulf Coast as well. In fact, some researchers from Texas A&M found that it's rising faster along the Texas coast than in most of the world. Now, why is the sea level rising? That's because ice is melting in the far north and the far south. We may have an ice-free Arctic within a year or two. Just this year, or maybe it was late December, I think it was this year, there was a temperature record in Antarctica at a particular scientific station there. It hit 64 degrees in Antarctica. There have been records near the North Pole as well. There may be no more ice at all in 20 years in the North Sea. Now, people used to look for a passage to Asia around that way. Well, they could get their wish, but all of this ice ends up turning into water, which goes into the ocean, which ends up causing sea levels to rise. Pausing for a moment. Okay. 99.9% of human history, the average global temperature never went over 61 degrees Fahrenheit. It's considerably higher than that today. It's at the beginning of the industrial, or at the same time, 99.9% of human history, the carbon dioxide levels never went over 300 parts per million. Today, there's slightly over 400 parts per million. And some researchers say we need to get it to 350 parts per million to stabilize the climate and prevent the worst potential impacts of climate change. The Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Accords, basically we're attempting, those represent attempts to keep the temperature change to no more than 2 degrees centigrade, which is 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. We're not really on track for that. Last year, I believe emissions were stable, but the 2 years before that, they had gone up. There may have been a year when they went down. They'll definitely go down this year. But carbon dioxide doesn't just go away because you stop putting it into the atmosphere. We still have methane to deal with as well. So there's a lag in the impact of any changes we make. Now, I mentioned they're trying to keep it below 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 2 degrees C. It's been estimated that warming of 5 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit is going to give you sea levels that are 90 to 200 feet higher than they are now. Now, Houston is at a sea level of 40 feet roughly at its higher points. I know I'm about at 40 feet. I'm well inland from the Gulf. That would not be good for my neighborhood. I'll be long gone by then. So, let's see here. Okay, the Paris Accords, which we pulled out of, they required, because emissions continued to rise after there was an agreement to reduce them. In order to stay on target, we'll have to reduce or reduce emissions almost 3% a year for the next decade to 2030. Well, that was the original pledge. 3% a year up through 2030. Because the emissions have gone up, to get back to that point of still having that same level of outcome, same level of emissions in 2030, we'd have to reduce emissions 25%. That doesn't seem doable. The last time the Earth had the current level, the atmosphere had the current level of carbon dioxide was 3 to 5 million years ago. The temperature was 2 to 3 degrees centigrade warmer, which we're almost at, warmer than now, rather. And sea level was 10 to 20 meters higher than now. So that's 30 to 60 feet higher than now. The last time we had the present level. And as I said, there's a lag between the emissions, the level, and the impact. So, yes, the greenhouse gas emissions did increase in 16, 17, and 18. They were stable in 19. They'll probably go down now. There's some impact of higher temperatures on food production as well in some areas, Honduran coffee, effects on animals. The blue bottle jellyfish in Australia is a pest. It's a nuisance. They have exploded along the Australian coast. The U.S. Pacific coast, you're finding purple sea urchins exploding in population, and they're eating the kelp. They're consuming the kelp forests, the kelp beds, which are the basis for the food chain of that entire coastal area. So we're going to see declines or crashes in fish populations, fish that many people whose livelihood, or fish that are taken by many people whose livelihood depends upon the fish remaining there. So there will be a number of consequences of that nature throughout the world. Bleaching of coral reefs. Coral reefs are disappearing. There are a couple reasons for that. Bleaching is just due to warmer water, which is significantly warmer. But here we have the trend in global emissions. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Here's the purple sea urchin. Now, the seawater is becoming more acidic because it absorbs carbon dioxide from the air, forms carbonic acid. The coral reefs and any organism with a shell, that shell is made of calcium carbonate. It dissolves in weak acid. So shells are being weakened. Coral itself, the coral reef is the reef is largely built of calcium carbonate. It's being degraded. The temperatures are bleaching them and often kills the coral, the organisms which create these reefs. So the organisms are dying, the reef itself is dissolving. And there are feedback effects. There are thresholds that are sometimes reached, and you get an inflection point. When suddenly the rate of change increases rapidly. Tipping point, sorry, that's the word I wanted. Could be reaching some tipping points. Many think that we are. Okay, it is too late to prevent a lot of these consequences. We're experiencing them now. Earth has warmed 2 degrees Fahrenheit since 1900, and another 1.7, which again is about where the Paris Accords would get us, but 0.1 degree more, would have serious consequences, which we're already seeing. We're seeing some of it: more drought, floods, hurricanes, heat waves, yes, lower food production. I don't, in some places. But there's a 10% chance the temperature of the Earth could increase by 9 degrees above the current level by the end of this century. which would be catastrophic. The United Nations has warned we are on the precipice of a climate catastrophe, as well as a biodiversity catastrophe. So it's coming at us from several directions. This could happen soon enough that children born today might see the end of what will be left of our way of life after we come out of this coronavirus crisis, the human experiment as a whole, so to speak, or at least the civilizational experiment. 10% chance. Now, we pay for insurance to insure ourselves against events that are far less likely than 10%. You don't have a 10% chance of having an automobile accident every time you drive, but yet you have automobile insurance. People have life insurance even though there's not a 10% chance of dying any given day. So what is it that's keeping us from taking these steps? Well, we'd have to give up too much. We'd have to give up a lot of stuff, even our information technology. A lot of greenhouse gas emissions come from power production, energy, the electricity that we use for a lot of things, including running the servers and computers and recharging our phones and so forth. About 10% of the global emissions, or at least the power budget, the electricity usage, is related to data, information economy. So I haven't heard any calls to really limit that. We definitely would have to stop driving as much, use mass transit more, live in more dense in terms of population. We have to build up instead of out, instead of spreading out and making ourselves dependent upon the automobile, and simply consume fewer resources in general. Because production of those resources, location, extraction of the resources, those all are activities that require the expenditure of energy that comes of which a side effect is the emission of greenhouse gases. The economy would have to shrink radically. It's doing that now, and it's not that pleasant, and it's not not really willingly embarked upon. I think this is an insightful book here, Roy Scranton's advice, Learning to Die in the Anthropocene. It's a short book. I recommend it highly. He just thinks it's too late. Just forget it. Find something useful to do with your time, like find ways to preserve the best that we've done as a species and accomplished. Our art, our music, our literature, philosophies. Just find ways to preserve that. Preserve seeds, because he does not believe that humans will be extinct. It's just going to be an awfully difficult life for quite a while, but that people are going to emerge and they're going to try to rebuild. And they will find this stuff, just as we have found things from art and literature and philosophy from the ancient world that we have learned from civilizations that have collapsed. Civilizational collapse is not uncommon in our species history. The problem here is that we are taking down too much of the biosphere of the natural world with us. Extinction, mass extinction. We are in the 6th mass extinction event known in Earth's history. I don't have that book handy, so there's a book called The 6th Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert. I recommend that highly too. We're destroying natural habitat for agriculture, for development, for subdivisions. We're destroying rivers by turning them into lakes. Urban development, we're eliminating the habitat that animals and plants need to survive. Animals and plants are vital parts of the ecosystem that help to maintain something like equilibrium, which is way out of whack at this point. For instance, they remove carbon dioxide. They can't keep up now. You've probably heard that that bees are mysteriously dying, probably from neonicotinoid pesticides. Without bees, a lot of plants don't get pollinated. Without pollination, you don't get fruit. In some cases, you don't get the kind of vegetables that are actually fruits, like cucumbers, for instance, tomatoes. They have to be pollinated. There's colony collapse is the term for this die-off of bees. If you can have beehives and you can keep them alive, you can make a lot of money spending your time just driving around the country at the right time of year, renting your bees in farms because they need them for pollination. The rate of extinction, which you can estimate from the fossil record in the past and just from surveys in the present to determine what it is now, it's higher than anything we can observe in the fossil record. And previous mass extinctions, the end of the dinosaurs and so forth, those had nothing to do with us. The environment was radically changed due to a catastrophe of one sort. It could be massive volcanoes that blackened the sky for years and years, and all plant life died off. And since all animals are technically plant parasites, they're dependent upon the plants, they died off. But Elizabeth Colbert argues this extinction is different because it's caused by what she called one weedy species. Guess who she's talking about? Homo sapiens, us. Here's a partial list of extinct species. There are numerous, many. I mean, I can't even begin to list them, but I'm going to mention a couple. As soon as I find my note for that. Bear with me just a moment. Well, one driver of environmental degradation as well as species loss, the loss of biodiversity, which people are beginning to talk, or scientists are beginning to talk about again, is population. How many of us there are? Population is going to continue to increase. There are about 7 billion of us today. In 30 years, it's estimated 9.7 billion people on the planet, 11.2 billion by the end of the century. There's no way that that many people could live at anything like the standard of living we are now living in the industrialized West. It's not possible. Short of Ray Kurzweil's singularity fantasy, AI rescuing us from ourselves. It's a nice thought. I don't think it's going to happen. Increasing population drives habitat loss. More and more land has gone, and you need more land converted to agriculture as you have more and more people. 80% of fresh water now goes to agricultural uses. And those agricultural uses often involve intensive agricultural practices using artificial fertilizer. These fertilizers tend to run off into rivers. They're carried to the Gulf of Mexico and other estuaries where the amount of these fertilizers act as nutrients for the growth of algae, that green scum you sometimes see in water. This algae takes up oxygen. It can take up so much oxygen that the other aquatic life die, fish die. There are about 400 dead zones in the world. They're called dead zones because there's nothing alive there except algae occasionally. So and that's near the surface where they can get some oxygen from the air, because although they produce oxygen, they still use it at night. 10 to 20,000 species of freshwater fish are in danger of extinction from overfishing. 1,341 birds and mammal species are likely to be gone by the year 2100, the end of this century. The Center for Biological Diversity says that 30 to 50% of all species, and that includes an awful lot of insect species and it includes plants, may be nearing extinction by 2050. That's 30 years. So one species which we lost a couple years ago, or we're about to, white rhinoceros, Sudan, the last male died in March of 2018. There's a couple of females. Artificial insemination has never been successful really with white rhinoceroses, so they're about to be gone. And as I mentioned earlier, billions, actually, I said a billion, I should have said 3 billion North American birds, about 30% of the total, have disappeared since the 1970s. They are just gone. The combination of factors going into that, that's a phenomenal amount of birds. Bees, I mentioned, the vaquita, kind of a dolphin, is extinct. The right whale is all but extinct. Additionally, there are substances being dumped into the waterways by wastewater plants, synthetic chemicals, pharmaceuticals, things called endocrine disruptors, which affect, as it sounds like, they disrupt the body, the endocrine system of aquatic animals or semi-aquatic, frogs and so forth. Endocrine system is your hormonal system. This is disrupted and it adversely impacts the ability to reproduce. People are finding some very peculiar manifestations of this disruption. Additionally, just the amount of pharmaceuticals that are going into the wastewater stream and thereby into the waterway. And by the way, if you live in Houston and you ever see a bayou with water in it, almost all that water has come from a wastewater plant. So we would be pretty dry if we weren't pumping water out of the ground and catching it in Lake Conroe and Lake Houston and Lake Livingston in the form of lakes and sending it here. That's what really drives most river bayou flow around here, is wastewater. So anyway, next time you think about pouring some antifreeze or some pesticide into your toilet, remember it's going to go through the wastewater treatment plant, which depends upon activity by bacteria to break it down, which must remain alive. Many of these pharmaceuticals and these endocrine disruptors are not broken down by bacteria. They just get out there and do their thing. So we continue to pollute the water with substances whose impact we cannot predict. Excuse me. Okay, let's go back. Okay, I'm not sure. Oh, there we go. Okay, let's return to the pandemic. As we encroach further and further into what's left of the natural world, we are getting closer, more likely to encounter the reservoirs of enough viruses that we've experienced in the past, that we're experiencing now. Viruses usually inhabit this reservoir species that they don't harm. I mentioned that earlier. It could be seabirds. That was the case with avian flu. Bats are common. So probably, definitely SARS-CoV-1 and probably almost surely SARS-CoV-2. In both cases, the horseshoe bat which is native to China. Viruses will sort of spread to, they will leave the reservoir when a suitable host is encountered that can be infected. Now, a given virus cannot, it's coded, it's programmed in its DNA to infect a host using certain mechanisms. So depending upon the kind of receptors that are on the host cell, it may or may not be able to infect that host. If they align just right, then it will be able to infect the host. So typically, you know, a virus is just going to infect a few species. Sometimes we are one of those species. Often the host species are wildlife like monkeys or apes, very much like us. Anything that gets to monkeys and apes, we need to worry about. Sometimes domestic animals, pigs and horses. Hendra virus killed a lot of horses in Australia, and it was traced back to bats. Pigs, swine flu, you may remember that. Viruses can't do anything by themselves. They are barely alive, as I said. They're just DNA. They operate by taking over the host cell's cellular machinery and making copies of themselves, and then they release enzymes that allow them to burst out of that cell. That kills the cell when they're going out. And then they can infect more cells and kill more cells, and you can have this cascade of death in the body. So viruses do mutate frequently for, you know, from chemicals, from radiation, and occasionally acquire the ability to recognize the receptors on a new host cells, and they jump to a new host species, something that's called spillover. We're getting closer and closer to them, their world. We can't just wipe them out because they all have a role to play. Bats are very important pollinators as well. But we should expect more pandemics even after this one has been overcome. And if you want to read all about this is a book from 2012, Spillover, Animal Infections of the Next Human Pandemic. I remember I read this when it came out. I just finished rereading it. It's easy to read. It's not highly technical. It's frightening, but it's probably worth your time once you feel you can deal with things like these. I know many of you, the pandemic may be the last thing you really want to read about right now. Okay, well, that's all I have. Enjoy the film if you watch it, and good luck with the questions if you take the final exam over the film. And that's all I have. Have a good summer and stay safe. Keep your distance. And I'll keep mine.